Well, hello everybody, and today I'm back with a video on building a minimal Git implementation that we're going to base on zip file. Now, this is our own version of a version control key. Oh, version of a version, okay. And this is going to allow us to create a repository. Then we create commits, we clone commits, and by that I mean we change our code back to its previous state in a commit history, and then we list all repositories, and then we list all commits. I hope this video is short enough and that it is very helpful for you. Let's get on with it. So we need to import operating system model sys.json, and we need to have some typing imports and then zip file. Our implementation is all based on it. We also need to define directories for our project. So we have base directory that is going to be from the users folder, and we have example git. Now the caret sign over there is going to denote the current users folder. Then we have repos directory that stores all repositories. Then we need to check whether this repos directory exists. If it doesn't, we make the directories, we create them. Else later on when we try to create a file in there, it's going to give us an exception. We use operating system.path. Now we use numpath to expand the slashes to the appropriate character on an operating system. Some require backslashes. Then our database is going to be just a dictionary. So we start off with an empty dictionary, and then we cache it onto disk with example.git. So we check if example.git is available in that base directory folder. If it is, we load its contents with JSON, and then we store it in DB. So we do an open, and we use numpath again to expand the caret, and then well, we are good to go. Then we need to define a function called dump, which is going to cache what we have in that DB variable onto disk. So we store that DB into a JSON format. Well, we will use the extension .db, example get.db. Cool. We don't want to make it seem like all JSON, just hide in the implementation. So we grab the path again using numpath and expand user, and then we do a try except. So we try to dump it to the file, and if we get any exception, we print a string and print the exception as well. Then we need to build a helper function called create repository that takes in the name of a repository, and then it simply makes an entry in our database that hey, there's a repository that exists, and then create its corresponding folder in the repos directory. Then we cache our DB to file. That is all it does. First, it needs to check whether no repository already exists. Then it sets it to an empty list, and it makes its corresponding directory. It creates all the folders associated with the path. But if it exists, it prints a message that says, oh, hey, the repository already exists. Please choose a different name, and then we save to file. Now that we have that done, we need a way to list all repositories, and this is simple. It just takes our DB instance, finds the keys in there because the keys denote the repository's name, and prints them. So we check if the length of the dictionary is greater than 0, then for every key in there we print the key. But if it is less than, then we print there are no repositories. Next up, we need a way to list all commits in the repository. So we take the repository name, and then all the commits in there, remember, we storing them in a list. So if that list, the repository exists, then we print that list of strings, but we are going to separate them with a tab character. If there are no comments or the repository does not exist, we print there is no such repository. Now the biggest function and most important is zip directory, that takes in a path and it takes in a repository name and a commit name and creates a zip file in the repository folder with the repository, the commit name that denotes the current state of the folder we are in. Okay, the current directory where the script was called. So it needs a way to represent get ignore contents. Get ignore files are files that we are not going to use and we don't want to save, so we denote get ignore as a list, and we check whether there is a get ignore file in the current folder. If there is, we open it, then we read the contents as a list, and then we try to strip all the lines so that we will not have spaces at the end and beginning of every line. Then we need to do the actual zipping. So we create a zip file instance. We open a zip file instance. Remember, we are opening it in the repositories directory and we are using the commit name for it. So we open the zip file instance and we keep a handle. We open a write mode as a handle that we're going to name zip, and then we will traverse the current directory with operating system.work. So root directories files and operating system.work, and for every file there we check if the file's name does not match anything in get ignore. If it doesn't, then we are going to write it to the zip file handle. If it matches, we will just skip over. Okay, this way, our zip get ignored. That's not based on any complex algorithm. We are not doing any regular expression matching like star dot what. No. Now we also need a commit that creates a commit. It takes in the repository name and commit name, and it will create a corresponding commit using the zip directory function, and it will make an entry in our database that, hey, a commit has been made, store it. So it's going to check if the repository already exists, then it's going to check for the commits over there, check to see if there is no commit name that matches the current commit name. If there is not, then we are going to zip the current folder and we are going to store it with zip directory. Then we'll create an entry. We'll put in the name of the commit into the commits list, and then we are going to store it in the repository directory and we will saved file using the dump function. Now if the commit exists, you print sorry, a commit with the name already exists. If it doesn't, then if the repository does not exist, you print sorry, there is no such repository, because you can't be creating commits in a repository that does not exist. Okay, now we need a way to clone. By clone, I mean resetting our code to a particular commit. We take in the repository as a string, the commit name as a string, and then we will look in our database and see, oh, the repository exists. Does the commit exist? Yes, the commit name exists. Then we find the zip file and expand it into the current folder, replacing all contents. Okay, well, actually we are not going to replace files that are not in the zip file, but I think that is something you can work on. So we check if the repository is in the database, then we check if the commit name is in the list of repositories, it's in the list of commits for the repository. Then if it is, we try to get the path using the operating system non-path as we did before, and then when we get the path, we are going to open a zip file handle to the commits zip file, and we are going to expand everything, extract all to the current working folder, the current directory, which is dot full stop. If there any exception occurs, we would print an error occurred and then print the exception. Yeah, and If the comment does not exist, we print that we show a message to show that the comment does not exist. And if there is no such repository, we do the same to denote that the repository does not exist. Pretty standard thing we've been doing today. Now we need a way to connect all these in a command line script. So we do an if statement, and this is going to check for the comment name and repository. We declare them, but first we need to check that all the user passed in an argument. If the first argument passed in, actually the second is clone and the argument is 4 by 4, the first is always going to be the name of the file called. Then we are going to grab the repository directory from the second argument, the commit name from the third argument, and then we try to clone that commit using the clone function. We pass the request to the clone function. Else, if the first argument is commit and the length is again 4, then we grab the repository name from the third argument to sys.argv. Then we grab the commit name to the fourth argument to sys.argv, and then we print a message, yay, we are committing. And then we pass the request to the commit function to do the actual work. Called commit. We pass in the repository, we pass in the commit name, and it does the work. Now we also check whether the user, the second argument passed in is list, and the length is just 1. The length of arguments the user wrote is 1, just like 2. Then we list all repositories. But if the person passed in another argument, then it means they are referring to a commit. So we try to list commits, and we pass in the repository name, which is the third argument, sys.argv2. If the first argument is create, then we are going to get repository name from the third argument, and we are going to create a repository. Else we print an error message to tell the user, oh, sorry, your command was not understood, try these commands. Then we give them a list of commands. Now you can see I use triple quoted strings. This way we are going to get a little bit of tab indentation when it prints out this stuff. Now I chose to use the angle brackets to denote variables to pass in, like repository name, commit name. So we support list, we support clone, we support create, then we support commit. Now in case the number of arguments passed in is just 1, that is the user actually passed in no argument, we are going to print a similar error message as before to the user, trying to more or less like giving them a help, telling them the number, the list of arguments they can pass in. And then we can try it out and we'll do our magic. Now remember I said that this software stores all our commits, repositories, or database in the users folder. Now on Windows that would be c/users/your username, and on Linux I think it's /user. Well, I'm not really a Linux guy, so pardon me on that. Now we are done with our code. We are done coding. It's time to take a test. So let's take a test. Let's open the terminal and test this out. So let's do first Python example get.py, then we will do example get.py, we will do list. Well, no repositories because we've not created any. So Python example, then let's create one. So How do we create one? Well, let's see the help commands by leaving a space, putting in nothing. So it says we can create. So create. Now this current folder is called example kit, so I'm going to name my repository example kit, and it came back, no error messages, so I believe it worked. Now the way we can see it worked is that we need to open the C users, then my user folder. Remember, we saved everything to the user folder, then example.get. This denotes a user folder. That is why we use expand user to expand it. Then the example.get. So I'll search for example get here, EEABCDE. Open it. Now you see I have a repos directory, and that is supposed to be this over here /repos, and then I have my example get.db. Now right click and I'll open with code so that we see that it has an entry of example get with an empty list, so no comments. Now if we try to do python example get.py list, we are going to get our example get returned because there is only one repository. Now let's try to list the commits in that repository, and it comes back with nothing because there's nothing in our list over here. Well, let's create a commit. So python example get.py, then we commit. The repository name is example get, and the commit name is, let's name it initial. So it's done, and we can see our database updated here, which shows that we have initial. Now let's see whether that initial was actually created. We go into our repository directory. You see that a folder was created for our repository. We can open it up and we see initial.zip here, which corresponds to the commit name initial, and we can see in it we have our example get.py file, our .vs code folder, which is from my project setup. So let's try one thing. Let's try and create a .get ignore file, and let me put in settings.json. So we don't want it to save settings.json. Now let's try to create another comment, and we will call it comment. Let me use underscore without settings. So it's telling me we have commits without settings already in example get. Well, it's placed in here. Let's see. So we have commit without settings. I open it up. I open up my VS Code, and we can see the settings file was not included. This settings.json file was not included, so our get ignore works like magic. Now let me intentionally create a file over here. Let me name it file test file.py, then print test. Then now I create a new commit and I'll name it test. So committing directory with name test to repository example get. Now let's check. We have test over here. which contains our test file.py. Now I'll delete this test file.py so I don't have it in my folder again, and then python example get.py list. So I'll list all the commits in the example get. So I have initial, I have commit without settings, I have test, and I'll do python example get.py clone. So I'm cloning from example get, and I am cloning the tests commit. Now after doing it, you can see I have my test file back. My test file is restored. Okay, now all these files were overwritten by what is in that test repository. Suppose there was a file here that was not in the test repository, it is not going to be overwritten. So as an exercise, you could work out deleting all these files over here before doing the restore. Okay, you can do that on your own, and I hope you improve from that. Now one thing I want to fix is that let's use tab over here to list them, and this way it might be hard in case a particular commit name had spaces in them. And by the way, if you wanted spaces, you might need to quote it with quotation marks. So I'll just replace that print statement /tab with /n. So python example get.py lists example get, and now they all come on separate lines. Oh, and one thing I wanted to show you, one thing is that I used a tool called Live Coder that allows and did the automatic typing for me. You can use it in your own presentations, and please let me know the quality of using it. It's the first time I have, so let me know if it's good or bad in the comments below, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.